Hello, Misfits, and welcome. In today's video, I'm here to tell you how to work around these 5 game-breaking spells in your game. We've all been in that position where you, as the Dungeon Master, have meticulously planned out the session and the campaign, and you have all these wonderful surprises and twists and turns in store for your table, and then they throw out that one spell that just totally ruins it all. I'm not saying that we shouldn't allow, the players to have their win and to be rewarded for their creativity, but sometimes some spells are thrown at us and they really stump us, and we're left there thinking, wow, did this one spell just, completely break my game? The answer is no. These are 5 of the most common game-breaking spells in my opinion, and these are some important things for you to know about them so that you know what to do when you come up against them. You know that they're not going to break your spell. There's a way for you to reward the player but still maintain some balance at your table and within your game. And of course, my disclaimer up front, this is my interpretation. These are my thoughts and feelings and opinions based on what I have read and what I have run. What I say you might not agree with, and that's totally fine. Everybody has a different way of running the game at their table, and that's okay. I think that's what makes this game really great, is that it's so different and changeable and unique to each table and each player. So take from this what you will and ignore the rest. Before we go any further, I do want to take a moment to talk to you guys about Into the AM. Into the AM is a men's apparel brand that values creativity and self-expression. I've been talking about them a lot lately because they have some huge shopping events on their site right now. Of course, that would be Black Friday and Cyber Monday. This big giant sale started November 13th and it ends on December 8th, which is coming up really soon. And during this event, you can get up to 60% off, which is absolutely huge. You should definitely take advantage of this sale, especially now that we're reaching the end of it. So definitely go check out their site, see what they have to offer, and make sure you snag what really speaks to you before this sale runs out. They have a ton of different products on their website, but I always gravitate towards the graphic tees. They're extremely comfortable, legitimately some of the most comfortable shirts I own, and the designs are extremely eye-catching. They have some really unique designs that I just love. I'm wearing one right now that's got this sort of black hole void design going on that's really cool. And if you use my code Misfit, you can get an additional 10% off your purchase. So absolutely take advantage of that. I will leave that link in the description below. So once again, go check out Into the AM. Take advantage of this Cyber Monday Black Friday sale that's ending soon. It ends on December 8th. And don't forget to use my code Misfit to get that additional 10% off. Let's get back to the video. And also, just to give you a heads up, I am using the 2024 spell descriptions for these 5 spells I'm going to talk about. I don't believe any of these were changed, but just to let you know. All right, number 1, let's talk about Identify, okay? Identify is kind of like the bane of my existence, to be honest, but this is a spell that commonly disrupts the DM's desire to keep some things hidden and some things a secret to reveal later. Okay, if you're unfamiliar with the Identify spell, it reads as such. You touch an object through the spell's casting. If the object is a magic item or some other magical object, you learn its properties and how to use them, whether it requires attunement and how many charges it has, if any. You learn whether any ongoing spells are affecting the item and what they are. If the item was created by a spell, you learn that spell's name. If you instead touch a creature through the casting, you learn which ongoing spells, if any, are currently affecting it. This is a divination spell. It takes about a minute to cast, requires some touch. But yeah, this has been used against me many a time to reveal the sort of hidden attributes of magic items, and it can be very, very frustrating from a dungeon master's standpoint to be constantly faced with this spell. And if your players decide to take it, they're going to use it constantly. So let's talk about how to sort of work around it, at least within Raw, and then we can give some ideas for how to work at it outside of Raw, and Raw is rules as written, in case you didn't know. So number one, this is a newer thing that I wasn't aware of until recently, but it's Nistul's Magic Aura. Am I saying that correctly? I'm not entirely sure, but this is an illusion spell. It's 2nd level. Identify was 1st level. And this is a new spell, to my knowledge. I think this was an addition to the new rules. So it reads like this. With a touch, you place an illusion on a willing creature or an object that isn't being worn or carried. A creature gains the mask effect below, and an object gains the false aura effect below. The effect lasts for the duration. If you cast the spell on the same target every day for 30 days, the illusion lasts until dispelled. So mask for masking a creature, choose a creature type other than the target's actual type. Spells and other magical effects treat the target as if it were a creature of the chosen type. This is pretty cool. And then false aura, and this is what you would use on an object. You change the way the target appears to spells and magical effects that detect magical auras, such as detect magic. You can make a non-magical object appear magical and make it a magic item appear non-magical, or change the object's aura so that it appears to belong to a school of magic you choose. So the big question is, would this even work against Identify? And I think there's a big argument that it does, because this is a 2nd level spell, and Identify is a 1st level spell. So I would think that it would trump Identify. I know that it specifically is calling out Detect Magic, which is not Identify, but I have no reason to believe that it wouldn't work against Identify. Both Detect Magic and Identify are divination spells, and this Nistul's Magic Aura, it's a higher level spell, so I think there's a strong argument to be made. So I don't see why you couldn't use this. So let's say you have a magic item in your game that belonged to somebody important. It's very useful to the main plot, and you don't want to reveal all the secrets about this item. Well, you can have somebody continually cast this spell on it for 30 days, and now that magic item can be hidden as a non-magical item, and then you wouldn't really find anything out about it using Identify. You could give it a sort of false aura, so it's sort of giving a false reading in Identify. There's a lot of different ways that you could handle this, but I think this is a useful way to work around Identify. Something else that's super important to know is that Identify does not tell you if an item is cursed. This is something I didn't really know or fully understand. It's something that I have run incorrectly in my own games. Even the current campaign I'm running, I've definitely revealed curses through the use of Identify, and that's actually not true. According to the Dungeon Master's Guide, whether it be the 2014 version or the 2024 version, it says, a magic item's description specifies whether it bears a curse. Most methods of identifying items, including the Identify spell, fail to reveal such a curse. So, they intentionally don't want Identify to reveal curses. And that's super important to know as a dungeon master. This is a great way to continue to hide some fun little tricks and surprises from your players without them having to, magic their way out of every single problem. So, that's a good thing to know, a good thing to utilize. And then, of course, Identify doesn't actually tell you anything about non-magical items. It tells you everything you need to know about the magical items, except maybe, some lore behind it. But it doesn't actually tell you anything about non-magical things. All the description talks about is revealing stuff for magic items. If it's magical, it tells you this, 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 and this. So you could have an extremely important item to the campaign and just have it not be a magical item, and then Identify is not going to help them at all. And that's good to know. Now, outside of rules as written, you could just say that Identify doesn't work on this particular magic item. If it's the MacGuffin, the item you need, the one ring to rule them all, whatever, maybe Identify just doesn't work on it. Maybe it's such a powerful and mysterious item that Identify just can't even cope with the amount of magic that is imbued within this item, and it just shorts out and it doesn't work. Or maybe in casting Identify, it causes something to rebound and happen to the caster or the item itself. There are a lot of different ways you could take that, but that's something you could do. It's just, you have to understand that that's outside of the base rules. And so, you're going to have to get a little creative and understand that maybe your players could end up being a little frustrated with this change because their spell is not operating the way that they understand it to. So, could be worth a discussion, but it's something, to keep in your back pocket. It is your story. You are creating it with your table. It's all right to take some liberties and adjust how some things work in certain scenarios, as long as you're not doing it all the time. Like, just adapt Identify for this one item, but make sure it works normally and as intended for everything else. All right, number 2. Commune, or, other similar divination spells. Commune is a very powerful spell, and it's a great way for the party to gather some information and figure out what to do next, or kind of decide how they feel about certain things. And sometimes this can be frustrating because you as the dungeon master feel like you might have to give away more information than you were ready to, and you might feel like you have to reveal some things that you didn't want to before, but that's not necessarily the case. First, let's read the spell description. So Commune is a 5th level divination spell. You contact a deity or divine proxy and ask up to 3 questions that can be answered with yes or no. You must ask your questions before the spell ends. You receive a correct answer for each question. Now, here's what you need to make sure that you read and not skip over. It's always hidden in the later parts of the spell description. But here in the spell description it says, divine beings aren't necessarily omniscient, so you might receive unclear as an answer if a question pertains to information that lies beyond the deity's knowledge. In a case where a one-word answer could be misleading or contrary to the deity's interests, the DM might offer a short phrase as an answer instead. If you cast the spell more than once before finishing a long rest, there is a cumulative 25% chance for each casting after the first that you get no answer. So one, depending on how many times this is getting cast, you could just end up not answering. But also, it's important to know that you are still in control of the flow of information. Gods do not know everything. Deities don't know everything. And sometimes they, aren't going to try to learn more than they need to because they've got their own things to worry about. They've got their own focuses. So you ultimately are controlling the amount of information that is being given out, and you can determine what the guide thinks they know versus what they actually know, and you can adjust accordingly. What a deity might believe is true might just be their side of the story. It might not actually be true in, the context of what's happening in the story. This is really up to you. You can get creative with it. This is not like the end-all be-all, oh, now I have to tell them how to get out of the dungeon or how to solve the puzzle or who's good and who's bad. You don't have to give up that information. All right? Deities, they are all-powerful beings, but they are not all-knowing. They are not. And use that to your advantage. Number 3, I've definitely been on the receiving end of this one. Zone of Truth. I have come up against this a couple of times, and Zone of Truth can be a frustrating spell to deal with, especially if the NPCs that are getting put in this zone are kind of backed up in a corner and have to, face this spell, and you really don't want to have to suddenly tell the truth because you're sitting on a real big secret and quite a number of lies, and you're not ready to reveal them just yet. So let's read the spell description. Let's talk about how maybe we can work around this so that it's not going to ruin the story or reveal too much too soon. Zone of Truth is a second level enchantment spell, and this spell requires a charisma save to get off. So you create a magical zone that guards against deception in a 15-foot radius sphere centered on a point within range. Until the spell ends, a creature that enters the spell area for the first time on a turn or starts its turn there makes a charisma saving throw. On a failed save, a creature can't speak a deliberate lie while in the radius. You know whether a creature succeeds or fails on this save. An affected creature is aware of the spell and can avoid answering the questions to which it would normally respond with a lie. Such a creature can be evasive, yet must be truthful. So, your character that's trapped in this zone of truth knows that the spell has been cast, so they can use that knowledge to their advantage, and they can choose how they're going to answer. Now, they have to be truthful, but that does give them a little bit of control. They're not being charmed per se. They just have to tell the truth, so it's up to them to figure out how to navigate that. This is where it can be really tough on you as a dungeon master, because you might need to be pretty decent at improvising and, being pretty clever with your words. So there are ways to misdirect and mislead people without lying. Certainly, you can lie by omission, or you can, sprinkle in some truths and sort of surrounding the lie, but avoid saying the lie outright. You could imply some things with some true statements, but what you're implying might be false. This is tough. It's tough to do. I had some experience with this. My party went to the Feywild, and I was playing an Archfey, and at least in like folklore and stuff, the Archfey don't lie, and so I had tried to be really clever with what I said without outright lying to the party, which makes me think of this sort of lie by omission or just be really clever with your words. There are some potential spells that could possibly work around this as well. I have seen quite an argument that the spell glibness could potentially work or override Zone of Truth. So glibness is an 8th level spell, and I think that's part of the argument. Zone of Truth is just a 2nd level, and glibness is an 8th level. And it's a School of Enchantment, and it says, until the spell ends, when you make a charisma check, you can replace the number you roll with a 15. Additionally, no matter what you say, magic that would normally determine if you are telling the truth indicates that you are being truthful. So, according to this spell, if you cast it on yourself before you're, enter this zone of truth or something, then you would be showing as saying something truthful. I guess the big argument here is if Zone of Truth forces you to tell the truth, then how does glibness work against that? Because how would you even lie within Zone of Truth? I just think this is worth a discussion, because glibness is a much more powerful spell, and it specifically talks about, like, if magic is being used to determine whether or not you're telling the truth, then glibness should show that you're being truthful. It's complicated against Zone of Truth, because Zone of Truth says that you have to tell the truth. You can't deliberately lie while in this radius if you failed that charisma save. So that would just be really tricky. I think it's worth a conversation at the table. I think there's an argument to be made for it, but there's nothing concrete saying that this is how this would work against Zone of Truth. I have also seen an argument made for Ring of Mind Shielding working against Zone of Truth, but a lot of people have ruled that it wouldn't work against Zone of Truth, so this is also, like, it's very controversial. There's a lot of, debate about whether this would work, but Ring of Mind Shielding, while wearing this ring, you are immune to magic that allows other creatures to read your thoughts, determine whether you are lying or know your alignment, know your creature type, and creatures can only telepathically communicate with you if you allow it. So, like, based off of this description, Ring of Mind Shielding should work, in my opinion, against Zone of Truth, but I think it was Sage Advice ruled that it doesn't work against Zone of Truth. And so you just sort of have to decide if you're going to go with that ruling or not. Because I think as it stands right now, there is not enough like checks and balances in place against Zone of Truth. It works too well. It's like too powerful, and there should be some stuff that works around it. And so I think with that in mind, I think it's worth a conversation about whether Ring of Mind Shielding or the spell Glibness would work against it. All right, number 4, Locate Object. Locate Object isn't the end-all be-all that sometimes it feels like it is, but this is another one that you as a dungeon master could find frustrating because, it might reveal some things sooner than you want it to. But let's read the spell, let's talk about its limitations and how you can work around it. Locate Object is a 2nd level divination spell. Describe or name an object that is familiar to you. You sense the direction to the object's location if that object is within 1,000 feet of you. If the object is in motion, you know the direction of its movement. The spell can locate a specific object known to you if you have seen it up close within 30 feet at least once. Alternatively, the spell can locate the nearest object of a particular kind, such as a certain kind of apparel, jewelry, furniture, tool, or weapon. This spell can't locate an object if any thickness of lead blocks a direct path between you and the object. So what's great about Locate Object is, while it is super useful and powerful, within 1,000 feet, that's a huge range, and you only have to have seen it once, there are a lot of limitations that they bake into the spell description, which is great. I have definitely used the lead to block the Locate Object. I've used that several times, and it's really great. I think any, knowledgeable magic user would take that precaution and put things in lead-lined containers and boxes or behind lead walls to block the Locate Object spell. Also, while 1,000 feet is big, it's not crazy. You can certainly have stuff outside of this radius, or, maybe this magic item is on something that's moving, a ship or some sort of cart or carriage or train or whatever kind of game you're playing. Maybe it's in motion, and then they don't necessarily know exactly where it is. They just have that sort of cardinal direction, and that can be a great way to kind of work around this spell and keep it from being as useful as it would be. Also, if the party has not actually seen the item, then you can definitely have it just point them towards the next best thing and kind of lead them on a wild goose chase. And it's oh, I thought I was looking for this magical ring, and instead it took me to this jewelry store down the block, and it's a place full of rings, and I don't know if any of these are what I'm looking for, and that could be a fun little wild goose chase. So I would definitely use those things to your advantage to kind of work around the spell. It's extremely useful, and I've heard of some really clever uses of it where, they lost sight of somebody that they were tracking, somebody that they were trying to tail, and instead they used Locate Object to try and locate, the fancy dagger he had on his belt so they could figure out where he is and where he went. It's a clever way of, tracking a person by locating the objects that they're wearing, which is great, but it can be frustrating if they use this to find your MacGuffin that you've been trying to keep hidden, and you wanted it to be a big reveal, and instead they use this spell to just sort of fast track their way to it. So, keep in mind the limitations that are in the spell description and be clever with how you use them, and be clever with how your characters, your NPCs and enemies would use their knowledge of magic to work around this spell existing in the world. All right, number 5, Scrying. Scrying is a very powerful spell, and I have been, I've had to deal with it quite a lot through the games that I have run. And so let's talk about it. Let's talk about how I work around it or have worked around it and how you can do the same. Scrying is a 5th level divination spell. It does require a wisdom save. But yeah, using this spell, you can see and hear a creature you choose that is on the same plane of existence as you. The target makes a wisdom saving throw, which is modified by how well you know the target and the sort of physical connection you have to it. The target doesn't know what it is making the save against, only that it feels uneasy. On a successful save, the target isn't affected and you can't use the spell on it again for 24 hours. On a failed save, the spell creates an invisible, intangible sensor within 10 feet of the target. You can see and hear through the sensor as if you were there. The sensor moves with the target, remaining within 10 feet of it for the duration. If something can see the sensor, it appears as a luminous orb about the size of your fist. Instead of targeting a creature, you can target a location you have seen. When you do so, the sensor appears at the location and doesn't move. So scrying is an extremely powerful spell. And depending on how well you know the target, there are some buffs or debuffs that they get to their save. But also if you have things that belong to the target, they get some pretty extensive debuffs to their save. So this can be extremely powerful and really effective depending on how well you know that target and if you have something that belongs to them, which is really, really useful. But there are definitely some ways to work around it. Number 1, for scrying to work, you have to be on the same plane as the target. So if you're trying to scry on the big bad, they might not be on the same plane. They might be in a different plane, either because that's where they live or they went there to retrieve something or do something. They might be in like a pocket dimension or something, like Mordenkainen's magnificent mansion, or I don't know, a portable hole. I'm not sure. They might be somewhere else that takes them off of the plane in some capacity so that they can't be affected by this spell. Also, if we're talking about magic users being targeted by this spell, there's every possibility they are using the spell non-detection to avoid being scryed on. So non-detection is a 3rd level abjuration spell. For the duration, you hide a target that you touch from divination spells. The target can be a willing creature, or it can be a place or an object no larger than 10 feet in any dimension. The target can't be targeted by any divination spell or perceived through magical scrying sensors. So this specifically calls out scrying. So this is a great way to protect against scrying. So this could be something that absolutely your bad guys are using, or they could even possess an amulet of proof against detection. Maybe they're not a magic user themselves, or maybe they are, and they don't want to waste the spell, so they have acquired this amulet. It's kind of the same sort of deal. So the amulet of proof against detection and location, very similar. While wearing the amulet, you are hidden from divination magic. You can't be targeted by such magic or perceived through magical scrying sensors. So it's basically non-detection, but in a magic item. So this is super useful. I've definitely put this in the possession of some of my bad guys to avoid getting detected through scrying. I have also seen people talk about using Mind Blank to avoid being scryed on. So Mind Blank is an 8th level abjuration spell. Until the spell ends, one willing creature you touch is immune to psychic damage, any effect that would sense its emotion or read its thoughts, divination spells, and the charmed condition. The spell even foils wish spells and spells or effects of similar power used to affect the target's mind, or to gain information about the target. So this is a really, really powerful spell. Yeah, and it specifically calls out divination spells as being something that it can sort of protect you against. So yeah, this could also be used to work against scrying and keep you from being, spied on. So these are some great things to keep in mind. If your bad guy is, very magical and has all of these spells and is like a lich, then it would of course be using these spells to protect itself from this divination magic. And also, if your, bad guy is really, really powerful, he might be surrounding himself by powerful spellcasters who can protect him against scrying. So just keep that in mind as the dungeon master. When I first started DMing, I was pretty new to the game, and so I didn't necessarily know the ins and outs of these spells and the ins and outs of, the rule book. And so there was a lot of, learning how to account for some of these things and work around these things as I got better at playing the game and as I learned how to run these games. And so I didn't know this stuff up front, and I didn't necessarily have somebody to tell me that information up front either. A lot of us were learning how to play together as a table. And so, this is me collecting my thoughts and compiling my list for any future people that are, in the position that I was in several years ago, where I just didn't know. So now you know, use these tools in your tool belt. And yeah, if you can think of any other useful ways to work around these 5 specific spells, certainly leave a comment down below. Or, if there's another spell that's not on this list that is potentially game breaking and really hard to deal with as a dungeon master, definitely tell me about that one. Maybe I forgot to mention it, or maybe I'm saving it for a future list. I don't know, but I'd love to hear your inputs and what you think are sort of game-breaking spells, at least from a dungeon master's standpoint. But yeah, this was my list. If you liked it, if you like this channel, you want to support me, please feel free to like and subscribe. That stuff really helps me out. But way more importantly, leave a comment down below. Like I was talking about. Talk about these spells. Talk about your own workarounds. Talk about other spells. Any of that is super useful. The engagement on this video is what helps people find it and find the channel, which is really useful. But yeah, with all of that said and done, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, a great rest of your week, and I will see you again next time. Out of everything on this list, the ones that I get the most frustrated with are Zone of Truth and Identify. Zone of Truth only because, the instances in which it's been used against my enemies were situations in which I couldn't run away, so I had to be caught in the Zone of Truth, and it was, hard to be dodgy, or if I didn't answer the questions, it would implicate me more. So that was those were frustrating situations. Not really frustrating, but it was a tight spot for me to be in as a dungeon master. Identify, I hate this spell. I hate Identify. I hate that it kind of ruins the fun and mystery and the sort of chaotic nature of finding magic items. But my players love Identify, and they're kind of I kind of feel like I'm never going to be in a situation where somebody doesn't have access to that spell. I feel like they're going to go out of their way to take it. And, yeah, it's just frustrating. I wish Identify didn't exist, or I wish it was substantially nerfed. I don't want it to reveal, all the properties of anything. I don't want it to reveal that information. It not being able to reveal if something's cursed or not is great, but I wish it, didn't tell me how many charges something had. I wish it, just told me that something was magical and maybe sort of the school, but didn't tell me, what all it could do. I get frustrated by that spell. Anybody else frustrated by that spell? Anybody, agree with me? Or is that just me? I feel like a lot of DMs don't super love Identify, but anyway. Yeah. I'll see you next time, guys, and, yeah, have a good week.